Today we are going to talk about solving one of the first world problems of eliminating shudder on the Tesla dual motor cars. Now right here we have a drive axle from Model X. This axle was pulled out of a car that was having shudder issues. We can see here in one of the joints that the race has been worn down from the bearings due to the extreme angles that the driveline gets placed into with the car's factory suspension riding so high. Now normally in the car, the axle's gonna be around like this. So before we lowered the car, you can see that right now the angles are pretty great, and that causes a lot of the binding and premature wearing, eventually leading to shudder. Now when you drop your car a bit, this is going to level out your angle, so now you can see that you're going to get a much straighter drive line here, and this will be less wear to protect your new drive shafts that you put in and hopefully prevent any future shudder. Now, to alleviate the problem, we can lower the car with the N2itive lowering links. However, when you lower the car, you introduce a new issue. The rear tires will not be able to get to a proper -1 degree camber for the alignment. Now, even factory, most cars as they age can't get to that -1 degree due to the bushings wearing out, and because of the car's heavy design, they just wear out those arms eventually. And it's very common that you'll see inner tire wear on Tesla S's and X's. Even on really new cars, just out of the factory, a lot of times they can't get to that -1. Tesla is good enough with -2 as a factory spec, so often you're going to have people that say that their car is within spec, but they're still going to have the wear of the tires. So by installing N2itive's camber arms, you'll be able to change the length of the camber arm to get the car to a proper -1 degree to increase your tire life. As you're lowering the car now to correct the camber, to correct the driveline shudder, and you've corrected the camber, another problem that can be introduced is toe. The lower the car sits, the more the toe adjustment will drift out of spec. So by having N2itive's toe arms, you can also then bring that back into spec, which is going to give you the proper alignment setup to be able to run lower without putting increased wear on your tires and to eliminate the shudder issue. Right here, we have a failed camber arm. We occasionally see these from time to time, not super often, but it happens. So over time, this arm, due to the weight of the car, can bend and eventually snap. When this happened, the car specific on this one, once it broke, it also left the lowering height adjustment completely unusable by the car due to it just totally being the wrong shape. Now when that happened, the car just dropped all the way down and could not be driven anymore because it was down so low since the sensors had no idea of the height of the car. Now you can see here the N2itive arms, very substantial, comes with the lowering ball already mounted, and should last the entire life of the car. It's very strong. The corrosion resistance is great on these, and very nice bushings. Couple key points to keep in mind as you're installing these. Make sure that you torque these two nuts properly once the length of it is set. The nuts need to be torqued to 20 foot-pounds. As you torque them, make sure you go back and forth between the two and try to do it evenly and confirm it. Once you've hit 20 pounds on this one, get the 20 pounds on this one, and then reconfirm it on both, because as you close it down, the pressure is going to be greater on one side, normally leaving the other bolt not at the proper torque spec. Also, make sure that this joint is facing down, or facing up, sorry, and you can use an included tool to help you make this adjustment. You can just put your ratchet through the hole here and make that adjustment. Tighten this one to 12 foot-pounds. For the toe arms, this is the original one, and this is N2itive's. So once again, you can see it's a very robust, sturdy design. It's going to be really strong. It's going to last. Also has the spherical bushing. Same thing for this when you're torquing. Make sure you torque both nuts evenly. And then the small one here, make sure you torque that to 12 pounds and 20 foot-pounds for those large ones. The lowering links, this is a factory Tesla one. These are the N2itive ones. We had a previous video where we talked about how easy it is to make the adjustments on these and even change the setting as they're on the car. Make sure as you're installing these, the locking pin gets placed when you finally seat the arms in and lock them in place. You don't want these coming off. If they pop off, your car could drop to an undrivable height. Now today, we're going to show you how to install these onto your car. We're going to have the full video installing all three of the products onto it. We're in Southern California here. If you find that after watching the video, installing is not for you, but you want to still get these arms, come down to Costa Mesa and we'll gladly install these for you in a couple hours. All right, we're going to jump over to the car and get started.
So today we're going to show you how to install the full kit of the toe arms, the camber arms, and the lowering links. So we're going to be installing we're just going to show you one side of the car because the opposite side is going to be the same thing. So there's no use, going through everything twice. So you're going to need an assortment of tools. You will need an assortment of wrenches from size, for the Model X, you need sizes 15, 18, and 19. So I've got an assortment of wrenches and sockets here, so I'll be able to take everything off. So we'll start off with a 15 on the outer camber arm here. So you'll want to loosen this bolt out here. And then once you crack it open, then you can start using power tools to take the rest of it off. Next, the inner camber arm. It's got two 18s on each side. And this one's a little tricky to get a power tool in here, so I'm just going to do it by hand. We also have to take the lowering link off. Even if you're not installing the N2itive lowering link, this will need to come off for this arm to come out. So the easiest way I found to do this is to use a couple of large screwdrivers. You want to hold the tip of this out and then pry on the other side with this one and it'll pop right out. You have to be careful when removing these lowering links. You cannot pry off this part first because this part is very flexible. You can bend the bracket, you can break this arm. This part is a lot stronger. So it's solid, it's not going anywhere. And then you can pry this off fairly easy with two screwdrivers. And then to take this other side off, you want to make sure to brace this arm side to pop off the link. So you can brace this side just like that. Then we can continue taking this bolt out so that you can take the whole arm out. All right, and with that bolt finally out, the arm should come loose. Sometimes it's a little tight. You might need to move this a little to loosen it. And the arm comes out just like that. All right, next we want to take the toe arm off. So this one's going to be an 18. There's also a nut on this side that you'll want to hold while taking that off. So they're both 18s. And then once you crack it, again, you can start using a power tool. Okay, again, make sure to hold the nut on the inside, and you can use a power tool to back this up. The inside one is going to be a little tricky. First, we need to take off the nut on this side. The bolt will not come out. They decided to put the inside or the head of the bolt facing into the subframe. So when we start to pull this out, it's going to butt up against the subframe. So in order to take that out, you would have to drop the entire subframe to be able to take this bolt out from the side that they installed it on. And instead of doing that, you know, we use another method of just cutting off this bolt. Has actually included the bolt that you will need to reinstall facing the other way. So the bolt head will stick out from this side. So you can put, so if we need to, you know, uninstall this again in the future or replace it, you can take the bolt out from that side and the nut will be on the inside. So in order to take these two off, you need a 19 on the nut and an 18 on the head of the bolt. Another thing you need to watch out for is there's a little clip here holding this tube in. So you got to make sure to remove that, otherwise it's going to be stuck to your arm when you're trying to take it out. You don't have to worry about damaging this clip because we're actually going to cut it off. And we're just going to zip tie this hose back to the new arm. All right, once that side comes off, this should come out. So again, you can see now clearly here that once we start pulling this bolt out, the bolt head's gonna hit the subframe. It will no longer come out. It's not enough to pull the arm out, so you're gonna have to cut this off. That's the easiest way we've found to remove this, unless you wanna drop the whole subframe. So, and also one tip to try to get this bolt out is if we remove this from the knuckle, bring this up, it releases a lot of the tension so that this bolt will move more freely, and that should help in you trying to get this nut out. So now we're gonna cut this bolt off. We recommend using a metal cutting blade, carbide tipped. Make sure it's a strong blade with a solid tip because this is a pretty thick bolt that we're gonna be cutting through. So we can sometimes run through a whole blade cutting through just one bolt. It depends on, you know, how lucky you are, what angle you go in at, the amount of pressure. So it's a little bit tough, but you know, as you do this, you get a little better at it. So we got to go in here, and we're going to push the bolt out so we have enough room to cut. And actually, I'm going to push it back in a little. It seems to be easiest to cut along the straight edge and not the threaded part. And actually, you probably want to move this arm back down here to get it out of the way so it's not blocking your cutting angle. So with a fresh blade, that should come off pretty easily. I found that the Model X's are a bit easier to get the room to cut that than the Model S. All right, and then once you've cut that bolt, make sure to be careful with it because it might be really hot depending on how long you've been cutting. So you could let it cool down for a bit. You know, just let it sit there for a minute or two. And then you're gonna wanna push the bolt back through. If you can get all the way out, you wanna pull it on the other side. Now it's free. And then you can take this arm out. Just like that. All right, so now that we've got the old parts out, we wanna install these fresh, shiny, new N2itive camber and toe arms. So one very important thing to remember is that the camber arms, and they're all labeled, so it's actually very easy to tell, but the camber arms are side specific and they're also direction specific. So you can see here, it says top left side, and then this side goes to the subframe. This side will go on the brake side, this side will go on the subframe side. For the toe arm, they are also labeled. See, this is the bottom, and this one goes to the subframe. But for the toe arm, actually, it doesn't matter which direction you install it on. You can just keep this one on the bottom, and you can actually flip it around, and this can go on the subframe, and this can go on the outside. Doing so will make this a little bit easier for your alignment guy to adjust this and modify this. So that's the way we're going to install today, backwards from the labeling. Only on the toe arm. The camber arm absolutely has to go in the way that it's specified on the arm itself. So to install these arms, I've always found it's easiest to put the outside bolt in first, and then you have a little play to install the inside bolt. So when we're installing the bolts, I like to put the outer bolt in first, and then the inner bolt, you can move this around a little to get the right angle for the inner bolt to go in. For the bolt, make sure you're installing the bolt going towards the rear of the car so that you have enough clearance to pull it out later. You'll actually probably won't be able to install it the other way because you'll butt up against the subframe. Kind of the same problem, that the reason that we had to cut off the front, the tow arm bolt. So you just kind of play with it until you get the right angle, and then the bolt should go in. And then you can spin the nut on the other side. Now it's important to remember not to torque any of this down until you preload the suspension. If you do not preload the suspension, you will tear these inner bushings, and N2itive will not warranty that if you have torn the bushings due to an improper install. So again, when reinstalling these bolts, you want to make sure not to torque them down until you've preloaded the suspension, but you can use a power tool to try to get it in there tighter, just not torque down. And also make sure to remember which bolt goes where. The 15 goes in here, and the 18 nut goes on this side. Now we can install the tow arm. And again, for this one, we are going to install this backwards. Bottom is still going to be on the bottom, but we're going to install the outer side on the subframe side, so that it makes this adjustment easier. There's more room back there for the alignment guys to adjust this. So again, for the tow arm, I'm going to put the outer one in first, and that gives me a little wiggle room in there to adjust it to get it into the right position. And then once you've gotten this bolt all the way through, make sure to put the nut back on the other side. And again, you can spit it on there, but make sure not to torque it down yet until you preload the suspension. And now that we've got the outside nut in, we have to remember to grab the new nut and bolt. Make sure that you have all the parts. You'll have a nut, a washer that goes on the outer end, and then the actual bolt is going to come in this way. Make sure when you're installing this, you install it so that the bolt goes towards the front of the car. Because if we have to take this off for any reason, if you install it the other way, if you somehow drop the subframe and install it the other way, you're going to have to cut this bolt off again when you do it, when you take it off later. So you want to get the arm into place, and then you can push this in and out a bit to find the hole. And then once you find that hole, you'll be able to push the bolt through. All right, and once you found that hole, you can just kind of wiggle a little more to get the bolt all the way through. And then once that's in, just make sure to put the nut and the washer on the other end. And you want to make sure to get that washer in the groove, so you might have to wiggle this again, push it against it, and you'll get it in that groove. And then push the bolt back in so that's flushing in. Make sure that washer stays in place though. It's got to be flush against this. And then you can put the nut on. Grab your 19 and your 18 wrenches. 19's on the nut side. 18's on the bolt side. Again, make sure not to torque it down until you've got the suspension preloaded. We're just going to get it so that it's snug here, but we're not going to torque it down. So now that we've got all the parts installed, none of the bolts are torqued down. Now we need to torque everything down to spec. So you also want to make sure, as I mentioned before, you want to preload the suspension before you torque down any bolts. So what that means is, if you have your car on jack stands, that's fine. You'll need to take your jack and put it underneath the suspension here on the knuckle, and then you'll need to jack the jack up so that this starts lifting up. Your car should stay solid, and this will lift up a bit. Now your suspension is preloaded, and then we'll start torquing down all the bolts. So the torque specs are in descending order, kind of like this. The outer camber arm is 140, the inner camber arm is 130, the outer toe arm is 130, and the inner toe arm is 80, and that's all in Newton meters, not foot-pounds. Again, 140, 130, 130, 80 for the outer camber arm nut. And for this particular torque wrench, once you hear that click, we are at 140. So then I will need to set it to 130 for the inner camber arm and the outer toe arm. And then once you hear that click on this torque wrench, that is good. And now for the inner camber arm, we're gonna need to get inside there to torque it down. All right, and now there's two ways to torque this down. The easiest way is if you have a torque wrench with an articulating head and you can kind of get an angle, there is enough clearance on the Model X to get it from the side. If you don't have enough clearance or you're working on a Model S, you're probably gonna have to go underneath the car, take off the middle shield there, and to get enough clearance from the bottom so that you can kind of torque it down that way. You'll bring the wrench up from the bottom, stick it into the bolt, and then torque it down from the bottom. And again, this is 130 Newton meters for the inner camber arm. And then for the inner toe arm, you're going to want to torque that down to 80 Newton meters. And one thing to note is with the Model X, there is usually enough clearance to get this from the outside, but if you're working on a Model S, or if you find that even with the Model X you don't have enough clearance, you may need to take that lower shield off and do it from the bottom. And there's that click. So we're at 80 Newton meters now. All right, now we've come time to install the lowering links. So what you want to do first is you want to make sure that the lowering links are adjusted to the height that you want to drop the car first before installing them. You can still adjust them when they're on the car. It's just a lot easier to adjust them when they're off of the car. So we like to do this first, and then we'll install them onto the car. So as you can see here, when the N2itive links come from the factory, they are actually going to be adjusted to the stock length of the Model X or the Model S. They're the same length as the stock parts. So if you just put them in as is, you will get the same ride height as the stock part. But in order to reduce the acceleration shudder, we actually want to lower the car. So a recommended amount of lowering is going to be about -4 or -5. That's in millimeters. And I can show you how to adjust that on here. It's actually really easy. You probably won't be able to see it in the video, but there's actually lines here that show you how much you are dropping or raising the car. When we are raising the car, we will go positive on this. So we would spin it so that it goes up towards the 5. If we're lowering the car, which is what we want to do, we will need to make this longer to lower the car, and we'll drop it down towards the -13 side. So in order to modify this, right now, when it comes from the factory locked, so you will not be able to spin this. So there's a little locking nut right here that you have to turn about a half of turn. So there's an Allen wrench included that fits this. So that you turn this 1/2 turn to loosen the lock, and now you can spin this to adjust. And so there's also a markings on here to show you how much of a millimeter you are lowering or raising it. So it's set to 0, 0 on the line. So that means it's at the 0 offset. So that, again, that's stock height. So if we want to lower it, we need to spin it this way so that you see more of the numbers. And so every 1 turn will be 1 millimeter. If it goes all the way back to the 0, that's 1 millimeter length increase. So we want to do this 5 times. So that's 2, 3, 4, 5. And you should also be able to start seeing the number peak out here of the -5. So that means we're dropping it. We're not dropping the car 5 millimeters. We're increasing the length of the lowering link 5 millimeters, and that will give us a kind of a sporty drop, not an extreme drop. You'll see a little bit of a drop, but mainly we're interested in reducing the acceleration shudder, and a -5 will give us that. So once you've got it into place, Make sure the 0 lines up with the markings on here, and you want to tighten this lock back up around about 1/2 turn so it doesn't spin anymore. So then once you've got that lock tight, it should not spin and you cannot adjust it anymore. And then now we'll go ahead and put this on the car. Okay. So in order to install these, there are actually locking links on here that will hold this to the car. You want to make sure to remove the locking links first before you install these, because you will not be able to push them onto the balls with the locking pin in place. So you just kind of turn these to unlock them, and then they will slide out the end. There's 2 holes that it goes through. All right, and when we're installing this, I like to install it so that the adjustment end goes on the inside and this end goes on the outside, because you'll be able to see the markings. And if in the future you want to adjust the height of your car, you can just take your wheel off, reach in here, unlock this locking pin, and you'll be able to adjust the height of it by spinning this again. But right now we have it locked, so it's not going to spin. It's not going to spin against this. So when we're installing it, you want to make sure that this arm is installed with it facing down. You do not want it facing up like this. That's going to be incorrect. So it snaps right on the ball there. It should be pretty easy. And then you have to fit this locking pin back through the hole to lock this into place. Just kind of push it all the way through so that it gets through both ends, and you'll be able to see that. You'll be able to see the pin coming out the other side. And then you twist this to lock it back down. And then now that it's fully locked, this is not going to come out. It's locked in place. So again, when we're installing this, make sure that this arm goes down and not up like this. This is incorrect. It's got to go down. And then you pop the other side back in. And you get your locking pin, and you got to do the same thing for this side. All right, now once you've got your locking pin through, again, you twist it, and it should lock this so that it's not going to come out, and you can test it. So it's in there tight, it's not coming out. All right, and now we are ready to install the front lowering links. But first, we're going to have to pop off the stock lowering link. So I found the easiest way to do that is to get in here with a screwdriver, and you can kind of pry the tip off. Now remember, again, you do not want to take off this side because you may break this bracket or this arm. So we always go from the car side first. And with the screwdriver, that should pop right off. And now once you've got that end off, you can brace this side with one arm, and then this should kind of come off just like that. And now that we've got this side off, we're going to install the new N2itive link. So again, make sure we take these links, or the locking links off, and we can kind of do them one at a time. One trick that I like to do is, because sometimes getting these locking pins back into place, I like to just kind of have it barely in the hole so that you don't see it sticking out into the cavity here, but it's barely in the hole so that you don't have to try to find the hole when this is on the car. So again, I like to put this side on first, onto the arm or onto the bracket. Make sure you don't drop the pin while you're doing this. So that clips on, and now you want to push the pin back into place. And it's a little tricky, but actually after installing several different sets of links, I found the N2itive links easiest to push these pins back into place, because they're fairly tight, so that means that they're guiding the pin back into the correct hole on the other side, or back into the hole on the other side. It's going to be a little hard to see when working here, but I got to get my hand in there. to try to get this pin all the way in. All right, and now you can see the pin sticking on the other side, so you know it's in place. And we just want to push that back down to lock everything into place, so that won't be coming out. And then this side's the same, kind of the same way. First, you need to take the locking pin out and pull it out so that it's barely in the hole. You want to be careful with this so that you don't bend the pin. So you pull it out, and it should not be in the cavity anymore. It's just barely hanging on. And then you kind of want to hold the pin at the same time as you push the ball onto the, or push the link onto the ball. Make sure it doesn't pop out. If you're having a little trouble, like I am right now, the pin's probably in too far. So you pull it a little more, and you try again. There we go. Now that you can hear that snap into place, so you just want to push this pin back, this locking pin back in. Kind of wiggle it until it goes all the way through. And then once it's all the way through, you push this back into place. All right, so now we've shown you everything you're gonna need to know, or hopefully everything you're gonna need to know to install this yourself. But again, we're here in Costa Mesa in Southern California, so if you're in the area, or if you really want to drive down here, we'd be happy to help you install it as well.